On today's show, is Isaac Okoro's contract situation holding up the Cavs' offseason plans? We'll talk about that on today's edition of Locked on Cavs.
You are Locked on Cavs, your daily Cleveland Cavaliers podcast.
Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you for making Locked on Cavs your first listen every day. You can find the show wherever you get your podcasts, Spotify, Apple, anywhere else. Be sure to leave us a 5-star review, write some nice comments. You can also check us out free on YouTube. You can watch this show every day. Just search Locked on Cavs on YouTube. Find the channel, subscribe, give this video a thumbs up. Also, leave a comment. If you've got questions for the show, that is the best place. I read the comments every day, even if I don't always respond to them. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more as the playoffs wrap up in basketball and hockey. There's still so much to get to this summer, and FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right, there's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. So Isaac Okoro is a free agent. He's a restricted free agent. Everyone knows this. This situation's been going on for quite some time, but what's the holdup? The Cavs offseason hasn't really been able to get on track outside of extending Donovan Mitchell, which obviously was the most important thing the Cavs could do all offseason, and hiring Kenny Atkinson as we start to see that coaching staff be filled out. We'll touch upon that a little bit later, as well as some thoughts on the Summer League Cavs as they had their first availability earlier on Monday. As I record this Monday night, they had their first availability, so we'll talk about that. But I wanted to start by talking about the Isaac Okoro situation, right? So he's a restricted free agent. We all know that. And I think that this is something that is holding up the Cavs from really digging any deeper into their offseason plans. Now, I'm not going to say that they had huge plans this offseason to go out and sign big free agents, because I don't think anyone would believe that. I don't think it's the truth. I think you're foolish if you believe that. But I do think that before they can really truly operate, this is a situation that needs to resolve itself. Because of the way that the cap works, because of where the Cavs are at financially right now, before they can do anything else, aside from maybe extending Evan Mobley, I think that is something just because that has no effect on the team this upcoming year. Aside from extending Evan Mobley, I don't think that there's really much they can do before the Isaac Okoro situation does get figured out. So there are a couple of options, a couple of pathways forward here, and I want to explain them during this first segment today. But one pathway that I think is maybe not the most likely one, but it's certainly the simplest one. The Cavs just sign Isaac Okoro using his bird rights. When you draft a player and he plays for your team you need to play for 3 years to establish bird rights. Obviously, Isaac Okoro has been in Cleveland for 4 years now. You have the right to go over the salary cap to retain that player. The Cavs could just offer him a contract tomorrow, say, I don't know, 3 years and $32 million, and there's no problem doing that. They're fine doing that. That is the easiest solution. I don't think that's the most likely solution. I think in all likelihood, Isaac Okoro probably going to end up on another basketball team next year. That's just my read of the situation. I think if he were going to be back in Cleveland at this point, something would have been worked out. So since he's a restricted free agent, option number 2, another team, and we've seen this in Cleveland before. I think it's been a long time since the Cavs have been in a situation like the one I'm about to explain, but we have seen it before with the Cavs. Since he's a restricted free agent, another team can sign him to an offer sheet. Let's say, the Brooklyn Nets. They could offer Isaac Okoro a contract. We'll say that same 3 years, $33 million contract that I proposed that the Cavs could just sign him to. Well, then the Cavs would have 48 hours to match that contract. If they decide to match it, Isaac Okoro stays on the team. That's his contract with the Cavs. If they don't, the Brooklyn Nets in this case, or any other franchise that could offer him that deal and he would agree to that offer sheet, he becomes a player on that team if the Cavs decline to match it. That I don't think is all that likely, but that is a possibility to where the Cavs could retain him just because another team signs him to an offer sheet. If you think back, way back to the first LeBron era, this is the situation that happened with Anderson Varejao, where he was a restricted free agent. I believe it was the Memphis Grizzlies signed him to an offer sheet, and this went pretty deep into not deep into the season, but it went into the season to where he missed games as a restricted free agent. And that's funny. That's the story as to why the only game in LeBron's career that he didn't start was Anderson Varejao's first game back with the Cavaliers after that whole saga. But I believe it was Memphis, signed him to an offer sheet. The Cavs matched it. He stays on the Cavs. A similar situation. That is the ballpark that Isaac Okoro is in right now. I don't think it's going to come to that. I would be surprised if that is the final outcome here, but that is something that could be the case. The third, and what I think it's looking like might be the most likely situation, the most likely that this figures itself out, is that Isaac Okoro ends up finding a contract that he likes with another team. We will once again use the Brooklyn Nets for this example because there have been rumors here. He could sign a sign and trade could be worked out to where Isaac Okoro wants to go to Brooklyn. He signs a contract with the Cavs and is immediately traded to Brooklyn. The Cavs will get something in return. I think having to work out those things can be a little bit tricky. We saw this last year in Cleveland. That's how they acquired Max Strus. They didn't sign Max Strus into cap space. They didn't use exceptions on him. Max Strus is a member of the Cavs because the Cavs were able to acquire him via sign and trade with Miami. And you remember that's why Lamar Stevens was shipped out. It's part of the reason Chetty Osman was shipped out was the Max Strus deal. So that is certainly an avenue in which Isaac Okoro could be gone. Once all those things are figured out, once this situation resolves itself, I think the Cavs will then just have a clearer picture of not what they necessarily need, because I think they know that. I don't think it takes some sort of basketball rocket scientist to know what this team needs, but I think that their financial situation won't be as murky as it is right now. I think that this is something that is complicating things just a little bit. I want you to keep in mind too, the Cavs are not hard capped at the moment. There are a couple of things that trigger a hard cap at the first apron, which the Cavs are still short of right now, but they very well could find themselves as a team that is in the first apron this year. That is a very real possibility if you take a look at their cap sheet. One of the things that does hard cap a team is bringing back a player in a sign and trade. So for instance, last year the Cavs were hard capped because of the Max Strus sign and trade. They were never close to it. They weren't in the tax. It was nothing that they ever had to worry about, but this year it could be. The other thing that I believe is new in this collective bargaining agreement, and if it's not, you'll have to forgive me. I'm not going to claim to be an expert on the new CBA. I'm not going to claim to be an expert on any of the CBAs. I know the basics, but I'm not going to claim to know it all. I'm not Bobby Marks. I'm not any of these salary cap wizards or gurus. Those folks know more about it than I do. I try and rely upon the information that they have to try and figure it out for myself. But my best read is that if you make a trade and you bring in more money than you send out, that's another way to hard cap you. This is something that the Cavs could encounter. Both of those situations, I think, are things that could be encountered by the Cavs. And I think that those are things that are worth bringing up as we have this conversation. I don't think that the Cavs are going to do nothing this offseason. I think that at some point moves will be made, but I don't think that they're going to make any significant move, whether it's a trade, whether it's using their mid-level exception, something along those lines. I don't think that those significant moves are going to happen until the Isaac Okoro situation is figured out. I don't. One of the things that was brought up today on Twitter by a guy by the name of Shamit Dua, who he covers the Pelicans. He's actually going to be a guest on this podcast later on this week to talk about Brandon Ingram. But if Brandon Ingram, for instance, say that the Cavs pull off a Jarrett Allen and Karis LeVert for Brandon Ingram trade, Brandon Ingram has a trade kicker built into his contract. So if he does not waive that trade kicker, the Cavs would then be hard capped because they'd be taking back too much money in that deal. If he does waive the trade kicker, Cavs wouldn't be hard capped. They'd actually be able to sign Isaac Okoro back to a new deal without having to worry about any restrictions. So that there are things that make this very complicated. I'm trying to simplify it the best I can, but ultimately I do think that this situation with Isaac Okoro is something that is absolutely not holding the Cavs hostage right now, but it's something that is slowing down their offseason just a little bit. And I think that's something to consider as we take a look at the Cavs. The only move they've made is re-sign Donovan Mitchell. And if you're only making one move, that was the move to make this summer. There's zero question about that. But I think that more moves will be on the way. But the Isaac Okoro situation needs to figure itself out first. I don't know what the timeline is it's going to be for that. Hopefully it's sooner than later. Hopefully this isn't something that drags on forever and ever. I mean, think back a couple years ago where Colin Sexton was in a very similar situation. Maybe not the same exact situation, but he was a restricted free agent. He ended up being part of the Donovan Mitchell trade, obviously. He was signed and traded there to Utah. He was a restricted free agent. The Cavs had not come to terms with him. That was all the way into September. I don't expect Isaac Okoro is going to last that long, but these situations can be tricky. They can drag themselves out a little bit longer than anyone would like. So those are some things to consider as the Cavs offseason still a little slow, other than the Donovan Mitchell signing, other than the coaching staff being filled out. We will have Cavs basketball to talk about later on this week. Summer League begins. The Cavs had their first Summer League media availability on Monday. I was there. I want to talk about what I heard, who I talked to, and so much from that. So that's straight ahead right here on Locked On Cavs. Today's show is brought to you by BetterHelp. You know, it is helpful to learn positive coping skills and how to set boundaries. Those are things that empower you to be the best version of yourself. Really, they do. And it's not just for those out there that have experienced major trauma. Certainly, if you have experienced major trauma, it helps. But it's not only for that certain situation. Because right now, it's very easy to go online and you start to compare yourself to everyone else, what they're posting on X or on Instagram or Facebook. And you see, oh, well, their life looks so great. And you start comparing yourself to what that is. And in reality, that's not real life. Social media is not real life. Those things are the highlights of certain lives. So you can be comparing yourself to the best thing that you see. And that is something that can bring you down because they might look like they have it all together, but in reality, they probably don't. And therapy can help you to focus on what you want instead of focusing on what others have, so you can start to live your best life. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. 3 things that I think are very important when selecting a therapist. Fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. That's another thing I think is very important during this process. So stop comparing and start focusing with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. So earlier on Monday at Cleveland Clinic Courts, the Cavs had I believe it was their 3rd Summer League practice. It was the first Summer League practice in which they had media availability following. So today the media spoke with Summer League head coach Jordan Ott, who I will talk about coming up next segment, as there has been another reported addition to the Cavs coaching staff that we will talk about coming up. We talked to him. We talked to Luke Travers from Australia, who I know a lot of Cavs fans are very interested in. I think he's a very intriguing prospect. I thought he had some really insightful things to say. Also mentioned a former member of the Cavaliers that he spent quite a bit of time with down under. We also talked to Craig Porter Jr., who is back for year number 2 of Summer League with the Cavs, played a decent-sized role for a rookie last year on the Cavs. Then we also talked to first-round pick Jalen Tyson. Craig Porter Jr. was the first one at the podium today, and I think that he is someone that, and I've said this really from watching him play for the first time in a real NBA game, because I do think it can be sort of difficult to judge with Summer League, but the first time watching him, he stood out to me like a player that you just feel as if he's going to spend 10 years playing in the NBA. I think he's going to have a long career, and some of the things that he talked about, just being in such a better place right now than he was a year ago, where he didn't really come into last season with expectations. He didn't know if he'd have a role. I don't really think he expected to have a role because, most undrafted rookies, even if you are a multi-year player in college, you have an adjustment to the NBA, and you're not someone that finds yourself in a rotation early on, But of course, due to some injuries, particularly to Darius Garland, Craig Porter Jr. found himself in a role. And, the Ricky Rubio situation last year threw another wrench into that. Ty Jerome getting injured very early on made it so Craig Porter Jr. had to step up. And ultimately, that was one of the best things for him and for his career, is that he was forced into action so early on. But I do think that we should expect to see him have a really strong summer league. One of the things that Coach Jordan Ott mentioned is that with Craig, you can kind of tell that he's got NBA experience when he's on the floor, because right now he's serving as the leader of this group, which I think is a really good thing developmentally for him as a leader, because if he's going to be a point guard in the NBA for a long time, he's going to be a team leader, whether it's in Cleveland or whether it's anywhere else. He's going to be important vocally. So I think that this is a really good opportunity for Craig to have that vocal say with a group of guys that, he is, it's crazy to say because he's an undrafted player, he's going into year 2, but he's looked at as one of the veterans here because he's been through this before, because he played so well in Summer League last year. He's looked at as a veteran of this situation. So I think that this summer, while the basketball stuff is important, I think the leadership aspect for him is going to be very important this summer with the Cavs. Also worth noting, he talked about that ankle injury, suffered it the final regular season game for the Cavs against the Charlotte Hornets. He said he's still not quite at 100%. He said he feels pretty good, but there's some achiness, some soreness, some other stuff that he has to deal with as he's still working his way back. That was a really nasty ankle injury, cost him a ton of time, was not available for the entire playoff run. I don't know how much he would have played anyways, but would not have been available to play just because of the severity of that ankle injury. So it's still not quite at 100%, but he is giving it a go. He's been a leader from everything I've heard at practices. I expect that to really carry over into Vegas at the end of this week and throughout next week. So that's an important thing to notice with him. Up next, Luke Travers. Out of Australia, he was a Cavs second-round pick a few years back, has been playing in the NBL for the last few years. He wants to be in the NBA. I don't know if it's going to be this year. Maybe it will be. Maybe it'll be next year. But Luke does not want to be, and he mentioned this, that someone connected with the organization he plays with in the NBL brought to him, after his first year of not playing in the NBA after he was drafted, brought to him a sheet of paper. That sheet of paper had all the names of guys who had been drafted in the NBA that were considered draft and stash guys, which Luke is, that never went over, that never played in the NBA. And it's a very long list, but it's a list that Luke made mention of specifically because it's one he doesn't want to find himself on. He thinks that he can be a role player in the NBA. I don't see why he can't be. And of course, we'll find out more when he hits the floor for real Summer League games coming up later on this week. But that is something that's very important to him. He said he spent a lot of time working on his body. He has leaned upon Matthew Dellavedova, former Cavs guard, who was actually a teammate of his this past year. He's leaned upon Delly a lot for advice, for how to get to the NBA, for how to take care of his body. That was one of the first things that he mentioned when I asked him about, what he learned from Delly. He mentioned that, Delly takes care of his body so well, and that's something that Luke is realizing he's got to do. So I expect we're going to see good basketball out of him. Whether or not he comes over to the Cavs, I think is an interesting subplot to this offseason. If the Cavs have an extra roster spot, I don't see why it wouldn't be a good idea to do that. If they have an open two-way spot, I think it could be something that is a good idea to bring him over. If he's willing to be on a two-way, I think that's something that could make some sense. So we will see. Summer League, I think, is going to be very important for him. Like I said, he thinks he can be a role player in the NBA. I don't see why he can't be a role player in the NBA. And also, he doesn't want to be on that list of guys that gets drafted and never ends up playing in the league. That's not what he wants to be. The other guy I wanted to talk about a little bit today, Jalen Tyson. So obviously, he's 3 practices into being an NBA player. What to expect out of him in Summer League, we will see. He says that he wants to make his mark defensively early on, which that's obviously an important thing. The level of basketball in Vegas during Summer League, not exactly the NBA Finals. I don't think you're going to see anyone comparing it to that. But at times, you can learn about players. And Tyson's going to play hard. Whether or not he makes jump shots, I think is going to determine how successful he is as a rookie. It's not going to be the be-all, end-all for his career. But if he's in the rotation this year, it's going to be because he shoots the ball well. That's what it's going to be. He's got good size. He looks like he's really strong. I think that the form on his jumper needs a little bit of work still. But overall, I think that the Cavs are very excited to see what he can do in Vegas this year. I think that they're excited to see what he's going to look like. Sounds like he's been playing a lot of combo guard, where I would anticipate him being in the starting lineup for them alongside Craig Porter Jr. He said that's kind of the spot that he's been the most comfortable so far, is playing. He played a lot of point guard at Cal. He's not going to be asked to do that in the NBA. He might be asked to do that a little bit on this roster in Summer League just because roles are so different. And that's something that head coach Jordan Ott made mention of when he was speaking with us. So that is something to keep an eye out. But I would expect him to start alongside Craig Porter Jr., probably Amani Bates. Luke Travers will probably start, and I don't know who's going to round out that starting five, but that is something that I certainly think is worth keeping an eye on. So I've mentioned a couple times Summer League head coach Jordan Ott. We spoke with him for the first time on Monday. I want to talk about that conversation, plus another addition that the Cavs have made to their coaching staff is Kenny Atkinson's staff starts to shape up into form. That's all straight ahead right here on Locked On Cavs. Today's show also brought to you by FanDuel. I love sports. You love sports. We all love sports. If you didn't love sports, you wouldn't be listening to me right now. You wouldn't be watching me right now. So we love sports, and it feels like this is often considered one of the slow times on the sports calendar, right? Where NBA playoffs are over, NHL playoffs are over. Yeah, you've got baseball, you've got the WNBA, but it feels like you're just waiting for the NBA to come back around, or you're waiting to go back into football season where you've got so much. But FanDuel's got stuff for you every day. Right now, I made mention on the show yesterday, I love the Guardians at plus 1,800 to win the World Series. They're back down to plus 2,000. Even better odds. If you didn't listen to me yesterday, you should be listening to me today, even though they lost on Monday night to the Detroit Tigers. You should still be listening to me about this because I've got a good feeling about this team. I think they're going to make moves at the deadline, and FanDuel is the place to make that wager. This summer, they're hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. So head on over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Thank you again for making Locked On Cavs your first listen every day. And if you are watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day and you have to turn down the volume because all of the shouting will do, I have good news for you. You can make the switch to Locked On Sports today. It's a free 24/7 sports streaming channel that's programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest sports stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So Jordan Ott, assistant coach to Kenny Atkinson, has spent a lot of time around Atkinson in his career. I thought he had some interesting things to say at his media availability on Monday. So Ott will be the head coach for the Cavs Summer League team. He was, I believe, the first reported hire for Atkinson's staff. He spent time with Atkinson. I believe he was the video coordinator in Atlanta when Atkinson was on Mike Budenholzer's staff. Cavs fans, of course, will remember that Hawks team is the one that won 60 games and was promptly swept out of the Eastern Conference Finals by the Cavs. It was funny, actually. Chris Fedor of Cleveland.com asked Ott today how much he remembers J.R. Smith and Channing Frye just making three-pointer after three-pointer after three-pointer in a couple of those series. And he goes, yeah, Kevin Love too. None of those guys could miss. It felt like we just could not figure out anything to do with that shooting team. So that was a little bit of a funny moment. But on a more serious note, Ott spoke a lot about relationships and how important those are to him. Not only in being the head coach of the Summer League team is an opportunity to forge relationships with some of the guys that will be on the Cavs, some of the guys that will be elsewhere in the NBA or in the G League or across the globe playing basketball, but how important these relationships are to him. And he mentioned that with Kenny Atkinson too. He has known Kenny Atkinson, and Ott said, I believe that he's been in the NBA for 11 years, and he's known Kenny Atkinson for 12 years. And almost every step of the way, Atkinson has been someone that he's been in contact with. And that's a big reason as to why Ott is on this coaching staff, because that relationship matters to him. So I'm excited to see what he looks like as a head coach of the Summer League team. He's coached in Summer League before. He's been a head coach in Summer League before. He mentioned that, if he could do this every year, he would. He loves being around the Summer League. He loves the opportunity to be a head coach. And I think the thing that was most interesting from this availability was he was asked how similar to expect the Summer League Cavs to look like the real Cavs. And it's still a little bit of a work in progress. Obviously, the rosters are so drastically different to where you can't replicate things one for one. The style of play is different. Just everything about Summer League in Vegas is different than a real NBA game. And I think everyone knows that. But they are going to try and implement some of the things that the Cavs would like to do when they're the real Cavs next season. So that will certainly be a thing worth watching. Last note for today, according to Hoops Hype, the Cavs are adding Trevor Hendry as another assistant coach on Kenny Atkinson's staff. So just a brief overview of Hendry. He has spent his entire career, from what I could gather, with the Nets organization. Started there in May of 2015, according to his LinkedIn page, and has not left. He spent some time with the Long Island Nets, Brooklyn's G League affiliate, but he has, for the most part, been working for the Nets in some capacity for nearly a decade now. So obviously that relationship with Atkinson exists from Kenny's time in Brooklyn with the Nets. So he is yet another assistant coach as his staff starts to round into form. You've got Hendry, you've got Jordan Ott, you've got Johnny Bryant, who I did not see at the Cavs facility on Monday, but certainly is part of the fold. And you've got Damari Carroll, who I did see at the Cavs facility working out with some guys. So he looks like, I mentioned the other day how I like that the Cavs have a coach on staff that is not too far removed from his playing days. And he looks like a guy that could still play. I don't know how effective he could be. I don't know how many minutes he could give you. But he looks like a guy that he could still lace him up. He could still hoop a little bit. So that I thought was a fun note and certainly a fun way to end today's show. Tomorrow's show, planning on having Martin Rickman on, going to continue to talk about this Isaac Okoro situation and really where the Cavs need to go from here with the rest of their offseason as things start to slow down a little bit across the rest of the NBA. But the Cavs are, I think, going to speed up a little bit in the coming days, certainly the coming weeks. So thank you for making Locked On Cavs your first listen every day. Again, I'm Danny Cunningham. You might know me from covering the Cavs places like Cleveland Magazine, 92.3 The Fan, some other stops along the way. Find us on Spotify, find us on Apple, leave us a 5-star review. If you're watching the show on YouTube, give us a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell, and I will be back tomorrow with another edition of Locked On Cavs.